Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to the third episode of the Third Grade Awakening podcast. I'm Justin, we're gonna go around again, introducing everyone, so...
Hello, my name's David.
My name's Hoy.
Amar.
I'm Danny.
Mr. Janicek.
And I'm Nate, and I think today we're going to talk about gun control since of the shooting that happened in Florida recently. And we missed 3 uploads, something like that.
Yeah, that seems like a good place to start, so why don't you kick that off? What do you really want to start this discussion with?
I just wanted to ask the question, I guess, do you think that policy should have been set in place to prevent things like this? Because I see the students there. They're now starting to protest, and there's this huge walkout that's being planned. So I know that there's huge backlash for what happened. Do you think that there could have been any way to prevent something like this? Or prevent it from now on?
They probably, I assume so, I haven't done the research at least. I think that, they probably have some preventative measures, like, they encourage students to probably talk about it. Mm-hmm. Try and, tell a teacher about it, some sort of authority, like the police. But
yeah.
I think that, didn't they, search that person's house or something like that?
I didn't look too much into the person. I know the laws of that area said 18-year-olds could get handguns.
It's been reported.
Or
what I've heard, this is only obviously not anything exact, but I've heard that the cops being the police obviously, have went to his house at least 10 to something like 30 times.
Yeah, he's come in contact with authority. He wasn't allowed on the property with a backpack.
Right.
Yeah, so that sort of stuff, and if we recognize some sort of problem and the need that's already been taken, the need to take action, which has already been taken by the police, at least 30 times. Maybe there's a problem in trying to figure out where to go from there. I remember Bruce Rauner, he came to our school a few days ago. I watched there. I wanted to ask him a question.
You mean Peter?
It was Peter Roscoe.
I'm not good with names. Yeah, Peter. Yeah, Peter Roscoe came to our school a few days ago, and I was I wanted to ask him a question. There wasn't enough time for my question, so it wasn't asked. And I want to ask him one of the potential solutions, even though no solution's going to work 100%, as for the psychological one, where they get them psychological help. How would it be funded? Would it be privately funded by the individual person's family or themselves, or would it be funded by the state? Would it be publicly funded, federally funded? How would it be? How would it actually work? How would the logistics for it actually work? And 2, if the person doesn't go, does it go to those sort of meetings? No matter how it's funded, would they be detained? Those are my 2 big questions to have about that sort of topic.
You started this conversation about asking about what can be done or what has been done and what the laws are there. I don't know if you noticed that the Florida legislature just did 2 things. They passed a law that increased the age to 21 about what they can do there, and then they've also passed a law that says certain teachers, if they want, can carry firearms at school now. So that is their legal, what they're doing with it on 2 fronts. They're making it a little bit harder to get guns, but also going to put guns in the hands of maybe individuals that want and go through that rigorous training. But if this is the third grade awakening, if this is round table here is the third grade awakening, the conversation should probably be directed toward the cause of all of this ridiculousness.
Well, yeah.
And it's not going to have a whole lot to do with laws. It's going to have to do what is wrong with the souls of these individuals that is putting this as a more of a norm in our culture, which needs to be eradicated.
Obviously, I'm
Yeah.
cutting opposite, but the point of mass culture comes up a lot because there were students who obviously knew or were informed of the incident prior to its occurrence, and still, like, maybe, I'm not going to say they didn't take it seriously, but there were, in the most probable sense, people who didn't actually expect something of this magnitude. And I feel like whether that's a loss at, I don't know, like values or the people themselves, or maybe how culture has become norms, as you said, I mean, we can debate all day about that, but the point is, I think there was something that was just kind of weird in how, like, it was almost like just okay, you know, like it's like they they knew about it. Logically, you should be afraid of it, fearful of it, and nonetheless, it just kind of slid
Do you
through.
think those friends of his or those acquaintances probably didn't have a lot of friends, but people that knew that this kid was on the edge, do you think they feel any guilt associated with not having turned him in?
Well,
That's it.
I mean, kind of was turned in 30 times for other occurrences. Maybe they felt that nothing was being done. I mean, I'm not saying that
I don't
would
know.
justify them to go out and say, okay, I'm just going to blatantly ignore this and then he'll do whatever he's doing. That's not what I'm saying. Maybe they just, it wasn't getting justice. That he wasn't getting the attention to, I don't know. I
mean, a discussion topic for us would probably be best at what's causing all of this. You know, I think I was writing my resume for teaching when I was sitting in my house in California and Columbine was unfolding on my television. I was writing my resume for getting my first job, and that was just weird. And of course, at that time, you think that's going to be the only unique incident of like that has happened, and it's just not the case. So that hadn't been part of the American culture really a whole lot before that. So what is going on in youth culture in particular that is making that more commonplace? That's probably the best.
I liked how Dr. Jordan Peterson approached it, where he came up with this idea that these, at least for the majority of these shootings, it's been teenage boys or boys and all that stuff. And he was saying how a lot of them were really nihilistic and they don't have that like religious thing inside of them anymore, because you can tell that even studies have shown that they seek responsibility, like they want a thing to have in life, but they're really like stripped away from that. So they're out to seek revenge and they take it out on innocent people. So if you tell them like, you know, have a stable family and give them a dad that shows them this is how you be a man, and you don't, you know, you protect, that's what your job is. So then, and I think that they're looking for that, but these people are, now that they're out to seek revenge, you probably don't want to give them notoriety, but you want to give them attention at the right time, which is when they're kids growing up.
Yeah.
So I think that they need to have a sense of, here, I picked up a heavy rock, put it over there, I did something, you know, and they're kind of lacking that, especially, you know, I don't know if it's on a level that's just, they just don't have responsibility anymore, or like that. I've noticed a lot of my friends have divorced parents, and I've noticed that a lot of them, they either take the approach as, I'm going to act like that way because I never had anything better, that's all I know how to do, or I'm never going to do what my parents did, I'm going to have a steady, stable relationship.
Mm.
And very few have chosen that route, but at least you just have to have something that you have a responsibility in life. No matter how basic it is, you won't be so nihilistic then.
I know that's the stat that said 26 of the 27 school shooters since Columbine had not had dads in their lives. So what does that mean? And what does it mean to be a father? You know, as I am one, I think there's kind of like, I would only know my own point of view, but it's like, it's kind of a no BS approach to when your kid comes home and tries to explain themselves, and if you know that their explanation is fruitless, you call them on it, and you teach them early on I think, more clear defined lines between right and wrong, I guess. And when there's an absence of that clarity, I don't know that, and I don't know if it's just a species thing, male, female, but men are just usually seem to be a little bit more cut and dry, you know? And maybe little kids need that here and there. Make things a little bit more simplified. I don't know.
As someone who was raised mostly, by a single mother and later on had a stepfather, joined into their lives. Like, you're saying, like, well, through my personal experience, I don't believe that, like, applies, because at times the mother, she has to take the society, like, she has to take, like, the patriarchal role of sorts of the family now. She becomes like the patriarch of the family, assumes like the social norms, and teaches the child the responsibilities and what they have to do. First, you could probably compare me and my brother and how it worked for him. He knew my dad for about three years. He still has some memories, surprisingly enough. I knew him for about 3 months. So it's like, it's a very staggering difference, and like, we are complete like foils of one another. My brother is like more of like the one who takes, like, even though he's reckless at times, he takes more of a sensible, logical approach. I usually do things based on my emotions at the time, and like.
So it goes back to your mother is very stable and no nonsense too. So yes, I probably stand corrected on that. I know plenty of women that are strong like that and can apply discipline. So that's not to say that they can't.
When you had shrapnel grow through your leg once, you know how to be strong.
Yeah. The one thing I want to note though is that, like, even with all this discussion about parents and whatnot, I think what's important is also, like, in the case of not having a father or mother, whatever it may be, what teenage dudes probably going to rely on is, especially in high school, obviously it's going to be their friends, right? The people that they are able to actually communicate with daily and interact with. And also, once again, bringing back to that point of mass culture, it seems that nowadays there's like I want to say a lack of seriousness, but there's not a lot of, not censorship, but like,
Normalized?
there's not a lot of hesitance to just kind of do things that are just kind of nuts. Like, for years, I'm just going to say 5 to 10, I've heard everything around the block from 9/11 jokes to the N-word being said by, like, freshmen at school, right? Like, out loud in the middle of class, like, jokingly, whatever, right? Like, that's going to be...
Filter. Kids don't have a filter anymore. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but there's no more, like, I guess, importance in those, right? Like, obviously, if it was post-event such as 9/11 and you were to make a joke like that, it would probably be a little bit more serious, offensive, whatever it may be. But nowadays, it's just kind of like, I mean, the dudes even take that warning seriously if we're even going to bring it back to the shooting that just happened in Florida, right? Like, that's the least offense I can say, weirdly, but, like, that's what I think is kind of dumb, is that, like, after, even with the parental situation, whatever, sometimes just kind of, the fault just kind of falls onto, like, the people, the culture that they kind of raised in. And I think that should be the main focal point instead of the role model part. So I feel like there have been less, I don't know, like, that's not as important to me as the cultural part that nonetheless they're going to be exposed to.
You could also blame it on, for example, Columbine. And I know for a fact that one of the shooters at Columbine, violent video games, as an example, he used to make there was this game called Doom. I'm sure most of you guys, Mr. Jessic, do you know about it?
All the, whatever.
It was basically like
violent video game.
Violent video game where you shoot demons. That's like
Yeah.
He made maps for that game. He had that game. He made maps for it. He did all that sort of stuff. And they attributed that. That was like one of the first cases of violence through video games that they attributed to.
But correlation is different from causation.
Yeah.
Is what's
It's
weird.
not exactly. It's from multiple sources of culture and environment where, like what Mr. Janicek was saying, you have to draw the line and teach your son or daughter what's right and wrong. And the culture nowadays is messed up, and you see more blood in video games and more acceptable
Here's
things.
and then Justin needs to talk, but I'll tell you, somebody like me that teaches you guys, oftentimes teachers are often constrained from even the ability to tell you what is right or wrong anymore. And I speak of that through personal experience. We feel pressure to not take positions on things because of the fear of offending some student's personal viewpoint. And we may have to be called down to the office to explain ourselves. Now, there's two choices at that point. I can either double down and go down to the office and explain why I would suggest to you something is right versus wrong, or I just don't have to worry about having a meeting with anybody and not say anything and leave the building at 3 o'clock every day and go home. It's the path of least resistance. So, Justin.
I kind of have something to bring up about like the past 3 things that have been said now. So first of all, going back to what you said, Mr. Janicek, and how teachers aren't exactly supposed to tell kids right from wrong anymore. Just a few minutes ago, I was talking with a teacher, asked them a question about communism, and they were scared to answer, saying that it's not like part of their contract to answer that.
Really?
Yeah.
That the contract prevents.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And the thing is, back in during the Red Scare, if you asked a teacher about communism, they would perfectly well tell you that it was bad, evil. So something's definitely changed in more recent society now.
Because the government is propagating that also through propaganda machines.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's right,
Yeah, both
but
are
at the same time, like that's probably like far on one side, and nowadays we're far on the other side. Like back then, they would just say it's wrong, but nowadays they just don't say anything. There needs to be, as we've talked about before, a balance, a middle ground.
There needs to be an intellectual discussion about what it is. Now, if you just take that simple example and you say communism as a philosophy, fine. Marxism, communism, socialism. You should all have working definitions of what those words mean, and then when they've been applied in world history, and then sit in judgment on them, and be encouraged to make judgment calls on them. And that's part of what the learning process is. But we're discouraged today from helping you guys understand that. And that is the teacher answer that you had just gotten from somebody, a teacher who wants to avoid conflict. It's easier to avoid conflict. But what you get are a bunch of young people, like probably this shooter before, and probably many like him before that. They would like some answers, and their dad's not around to give them any answers. And they're frustrated, and they go look for answers on the internet, and they find really stupid answers, maybe. You know, I don't know. That's where I'm seeing.
Misinterpreted it too.
Right. There's no filter, and there's no parent or father figure that might, or teacher figure in this case, that may be helping them filter a little bit. And I think, Justin, part of that, sadly, for this other teacher that you might be talking about, we are no longer trusted that much to help be a filter for you. The school teacher is not as trusted in our culture as we used to be, which I think is a net negative for all of us. Whether it's the students that don't trust us, or the parents that don't trust us, or the school administration that doesn't trust our professionalism, we're not treated as professionals in that regard anymore to help you guys be a filter. And that's frustrating for me as a teacher, too.
It makes me think of I can see some ways like that sort of thing's like sort of a positive thing to do because it can stop teachers from sort of like being an indoctrination point for their students. Like it can help encourage critical thinking by not giving them any other position. Like a neutral teacher would simply help them evolve their critical thinking skills. That's like what it seems from my point of view, at least.
It might take this discussion, but sadly not everybody wants to participate in that. But
well, yeah, let me ask from somebody who hasn't talked yet. Hoy, what do you think about it? current topic at our hands.
It's definitely interesting. Mr. Jansek, do you know when was the cutoff point of when teachers stop being trusted as a source of information or filter?
That's a great question, Noy. It perhaps could have begun incrementally during the Vietnam era. It could have started there, but I think it really got exacerbated probably in the 1990s and early 2000s. This is more of a recent phenomenon, you know. This mindset that we're seeing, I think, a lot more, whether it's in the public school system, is that we all need to be treated the same, and everybody's unique and everybody's special, and everybody has to be cultivated in their own way, and everybody has a customized, individualized education plan, and everybody gets we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and we don't want to discourage anybody, and the way that you do that is the self-esteem movement, and you build children up even if there's no foundation. So when a kid gets rattled when they get a little bit older, when they really come into question, and something happens that triggers self-reflection, I think they become a little bit more unstable. They're not allowed to fail as often as I used to fail. I remember being a soccer goalie when I was in youth soccer, and the soccer goals were as big as they are in youth soccer now, you know what I mean? And I remember standing in the goal going, there's no way I'm going to be able to stop one of these shots. And so what did they do over the years? They made all the soccer nets, like, for the little kids, it's all so that you don't fail. You've already heard me 100 times talk about the bumper bowling analogy. If students are not allowed, and if young people are not allowed to fail and self-reflect, then they're never going to have to. And if you never have to figure out how to correct a behavior, you're not going to have the coping mechanism to know how to do it. And I don't think that can be taught to older people. I think it's a quality of youth experience that everybody should experience. You know. So
I had a sensitive topic, or a sensitive event with that one when my sister was going. You know, she's does research at the University of Chicago, and you know, she's like really big in school and all that stuff. You know, good for her. But then she came home one day and she goes, she was like, you know, I was just there that day, you know, doing my own thing, and nobody's there to tell me what to do, and you know, I was like, there should be somebody watching me, you know, in case or whatever, and like, there's all this thing going on. I'm like, welcome to the real world, you know. Maybe even if that's like the borderline, like we're talking about the expansion of science and learning. You think anybody was there to tell Copernicus what to do, you know, like that just doesn't happen. It kind of takes your own experience and say, okay, I failed at this, and you know, if you fail, then maybe you'll be that person that gets to, you know, make sure or watch at a, you know, safe distance. But like that's how you're gonna learn the best.
Well, it's all about self-strength as well. There's seemingly, as I've said many times, there's seemingly a lack of that nowadays as well, alongside self-value, right? It's the idea that somebody without that sort of overlooking protection or whatever, right, if they fail and they're just kind of left there, they might think of themselves lesser and lesser, instead of actually trying to improve or think of themselves as better. It just ends up being this sort of craze where nowadays we have such a thing as mass depression. I'm using the word mass a lot, but it is kind of true, in my opinion, in my own experiences.
Well, and with the culture that you guys have right now, where anxiety and depression is such a common word that gets tossed around. I'll tell you that I don't remember anybody that I went to high school with ever having that label. Whether or not they were suffering or not I don't know. I'm sure some people were, but the pervasiveness of its acceptance now, or what puts people over the edge for anxiousness, is a bad grade on a test, or their friend gets mad at them, or their mom yelled at them. It just doesn't hold the same merit as what probably real depression actually looks like. You know. But that's, and if you say anything like that in today's culture, you're going to be labeled insensitive. So most people that might think that don't say it anymore. You just stay quiet.
I mean, like, if you're a fan of history, once again, like, depression, I feel like it's so weird looking at it now, because if you think of the events that humans just in general have been through, it's kind of amazing to see, like, really how silly it is to kind of look at us nowadays, right? Because if you talk anything like, oh wow, the Black Plague kills millions of people, that would be a logically enough depression for people, right? If you watch your whole family die, it's something you can't even avoid or protect them against. If you watch, like, let's say World War I, The Lost Generation, that's a logical form of depression after the war. I mean, you just watched a bunch of 18-year-olds get drafted into nothingness, basically. And then now it's like such like silliness to be like, well, I mean, I guess, you know, my dad yelled at me, I guess I'll just, you know.
It's time to grow up. What Mr. Janicek was saying earlier and what you were saying earlier, Denny. Mr. Janicek, you were saying that teachers don't really have the right to say what they want to say.
Well, they can. They can, but they're going to have to do it at their own peril. They're going to probably have to explain themselves at some point.
Mm-hmm. There's a lack of kids having more than a father figure. I know that you were talking about your coach, and how he was a huge influence on you, and there's less and less of those type of figures in people's lives, which may have affected your sister, Denny. Maybe when she was done talking to the people at the university and she was left to herself, people don't really have that much independence. And they need the assurance, they need oh, you did a good job on this test.
Wait, so are you saying that your idea of solution would not be the improvement of the people, like self-improvement, but instead having more people to be that overlooking protection?
I don't know 100%. I know that there is a huge lack of independency compared to the generations before us.
Here's something I've seen that may have maybe shed light on the development of a relationship. As you spoke to the one that I had with my coach, and maybe what I see a lot of young people think today is like supposed to be a given. I think a lot of you guys in your culture think that respect is supposed to be given to you automatically.
No.
And actually respect from more of, I would say, we'll just call it traditional for lack of a better term right now, is something that is actually earned. And you have to do for others to gain their respect. You know, you have to earn respect. It isn't something that is automatically given. And I remember that relationship was powerful with my coach because I worked my rear end off for him and for what our program goals were. And just at that time, what I thought was normal. I'm like, I commit to something, I work hard, I earned his respect, and the relationship was solid, you know. And it was real. It was real. And I think a lot of our generation currently, our digital relationships, we know are not real. Like there's an inherent knowledge that you know those aren't real human relationships. But a lot of people are retreating to those relationships, cultivating and developing them, but at the same time, they're not real. They're virtual. They're almost real, but they're not real. And when you look at people in the eye, and when you work for people, and when you do your best, success or failure, you're looking at people and you're developing a human relationship. And if you care about somebody else, then you have empathy. And they have empathy for you. And what goes around comes around. And if you don't have those meaningful relationships with other people, you know there's a void inside you. You know? And I think a lot of these young people that turn to this violent stuff, they have a void in there, a major void. Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's why I don't even talk to anyone on those social media things. I was like, if you want to talk to me, it's either to face or through text, where it's, you know, like less of a hassle. But like, I prefer to be seen in person. And that was just like I usually don't watch TV, but this was like a rare occurrence where it was like Black Mirror, and it was like a satire, and it's like about that, where people now respect is, oh, you took a cute little picture, you know. And it's like, that's unfortunately the basis of our, you know, this is how we're gonna build a strong friendship, is some stupid picture? Or is it about, you know, I listen to your hardships and we go through it together and then we build up from there? And unfortunately though, it's a lot easier. I mean, it is easier, I'm not gonna say unfortunately. I mean, that's kind of the point of it, is I can talk to you when you're not next to me, but it's gotten a lot less meaningful. And that's, I think that probably is where you know, people are gonna go psycho on you, or, you know, sociopathic if nothing's meaningful. They don't have real relationships, and it's only gonna snowball from there, because if they don't have with one person, then they're gonna be ignored by everyone else. And then if they're ignored by everyone else, even the people who they thought they were close to, it's like, what do I have now? I have nothing. So I'm gonna go shoot innocent people.
And I think, I don't know, and, you know, Toy, you brought up the faith component before. You know, in a culture that is losing faith, you know, and there's a set that I am so important, I'm the center of the universe. I think I've mentioned that maybe even in class, where a culture believes that I am the most important thing in the universe, and you don't get your way, then you get frustrated people. I'm so special. But if there's no adherence to a connectedness in the universe somehow, what the transcendentalists would have called the oversoul, we're all connected somehow, you know, somehow. They didn't claim righteousness of knowledge of what it was, but they created the Unitarian faith to think about, you know, that we are connected somehow. And there was a spiritual connection there. Whether you want to call it Christian or Buddhist or whatever, Muslim, it doesn't matter. Generally speaking, I think faithful people are a little bit more grounded because they're humble. They know they're not the most important thing in the universe. Or at least they believe it. They believe I'm not the most important thing. And it allows their mind to be open a little bit if you're a little bit humble. You know? And faith teaches humility, you know? And it teaches a lot of different things. And so I think with the lack of faith in our culture, and even the ability to discuss faith in our culture, I think we're losing from that.
Well, I mean, if we want to talk, like, I don't need to, like, this might be a counter argument, but one of the most interesting things I think I've ever had the privilege or luxury of reading was The Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, right? Edwards and whatnot. And the thing that, if you imagine the audience in the time period, obviously, like, the First Great Awakening, roughly. Well, actually, it was during it, but it was very contrary to transcendentalism, I feel like. But the idea that it's kind of like a brute force of getting people to, like, you know, start working hard and, like, start actually, like, caring about, not saying they're meaningless, but it's in, like, you know, like, dude, you're not gonna live your life being, like, that lazy, doing nothing, whatever. Like, that's a sin, you know? Like, you should be working to improve yourself, to save yourself from, obviously, the atonement that you have to go through, right? And, like, the idea that existed in that time period that got people, like, off their asses, like, that just speaks to me, because I feel like that's what is seemingly required now, but the idea...
Essentially scaring people back into submission? Or
right, but the faith process of it would be, I think, ineffective now, because obviously we're more secular, and it's more of a realistic, scientific sort of world that we're in. So I don't know how it would be adapted into that, but nonetheless, it seems like such a powerful tool that they had to use.
Well, but think about the audience then compared to the audience you're talking about now. You're right. The people that Jonathan Edwards was upset with in the 1740s were people that you would call today evangelical Christians, right? Like they would be crazy by our standards today. But Jonathan Edwards looked at them and said, "Oh my gosh, you guys missed church once or twice or 3 times? What's the matter with you?" Like, that's who he was talking to, you know, and he's like, you guys better get with the program, right? Now, today we're talking about people that will just say, there is no God,
right?
You know, and, or take the mindset that they're the most important. And there's nobody that would have sat and listened to Jonathan Edwards in the 1740s that would even enter the debate in the same mindset that we enter it today. So you might be right. So what would it have to be today? The big fear factor that may push people to be humble. What would it be today? I don't totally know either, you know. You know, I think in the themes of our history classes, we've discovered that most people will only learn and ask deep questions about why stuff happens in times of economic distress, depression or whatnot, or in times of conflict like war. So I don't want any of those things to happen, neither do probably any of you. But how do you get a mass movement stimulated of awareness, let's just call it, or of humility maybe, or whatever we want it, whatever you would want to say it should be? How do you get a mass movement going to have people to be thoughtful and deep and reflective if you don't have those two primary motivators anymore? Can you do it via faith, or can you do it via the subject matter? Is it going to take a Netflix show to do it? You know,
It's pretty unprecedented because we've never had to deal with this situation without those things before, I feel like. I mean, without the religious thing, that was their thing, but now today it's like, how do we get people to care when they don't have any of those foundations?
yes.
Yeah, so that's your question.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting is the two things that already bring people together: economic depression and more or less war, I'd say, right? Is that those two things, what they bring with them is kind of what causes, I'd say, like in economic depression, it's sort of like a sense of desperation, right? Like, what can I do to get out of this situation? Like, what can we do to bring our economy back up and running? Like, uniting to solve that. Same with conflict. It's also a sense of, conflict brings almost a sense of like patriotism, right? You wouldn't want to be a communist when your dudes, your soldiers are out there fighting. Like, you be a traitor, right? You don't want to be labeled a traitor. You kind of want to be united. You want to be with your country, you know? And like, those sort of feelings and values, that's something that faith once was, and now, because that's gone, there has to be a new sort of universal value, I guess, that some event can bring to bring us together.
Yeah, because rhetoric, or appealing through logic and using the tools of logic anymore, it doesn't work to a culture that can't read a section of the American's textbook and take adequate notes. Like, you're not going to be able to appeal to an audience that can hardly read anymore. You know, it's really, you can't use logic anymore. You're kind of reduced, or you're limited in how you can appeal to people. And the most effective way to do that nationalistically is through that conflict that you're talking about. And they talk about the World War II and Great Depression folks as the greatest generation a lot, but they really only are, they're labeled that because of things that they had no control over at the same time. They had no control or understanding of why the Great Depression happened to them, and then 10 years later, why World War II happened to them. Those folks didn't have any choice in that. They didn't deal with it too badly. I think they dealt with it well, but they didn't have any choice of getting into it, you know. So, yeah, so you have to, I guess maybe we'll mature via our historical circumstance and maybe just the elements of these shootings. And maybe they can help us mature, but I don't know if we're going to get any comprehensive answer. You're looking for a comprehensive solution, a universal value, whatever it is, right? You want things to become stable, humble, normalized. That's what you'd like. But I don't know that that's ever existed either. There may have been times it's been better, and I would agree. But with this information age, and you get to see all this stuff happening at a moment's notice. You know, did mass murder take place in 1910? Sure. Did it happen in 1800? Did Jack the Ripper exist? You know, did awful things happen in the past? Sure. But now you just get to see them every moment that they do happen.
Then you kind of get desensitized, though, because it's like, oh shit, there's another shooting happened in Chicago. It's like, I don't know, like that shouldn't be how it is, I'd say. Like, it should be more, I don't know.
Like we've had enough, right?
Yeah.
Like we've had enough of this. Where
Well,
do you draw
that's
the
the
line?
thing, like, really, like, now they're saying, like, oh, we've had enough, you know, but this isn't the first or the second mass shooting, obviously. Anything from Columbine to Sandy Hooks, like, it's it's been here for the last like almost 20 years, right? And now, since this is most likely going to be a movement for like another 5 months or something, right? It's like I don't know how exactly where we can get anything.
Well, you're gonna have the walkout, the national walkout that those kids put on for next week or whatever. And I think you heard me say it in class, you better be prepared. Like, I understand the emotional response to want to do something. But if anybody that walks out and they get a camera put in their face and a microphone put in their face, and they do not have the ability to actually go beyond an emotional appeal that says, this is terrible, something's got to be done about this, and you don't even understand the history of what the Second Amendment is and why it's in the Constitution and why it's there, and you can't speak to it, and you don't know what your local gun laws are versus a national law, and you don't know the information that helps anybody take you seriously, then you're discrediting your own ability to participate in the narrative, you know. And that's hard because it takes labor. It takes reading, it takes knowledge, it takes research.
Nothing beats research.
Right. And then you have to have that ability to filter the research to know which is accurate, you know. And that's hard to do in a world that promotes and does have to consume fake news at times, right? And mistruths or partial truths that are serving a political agenda as opposed to a, you know, maybe helping try to inform the public. Maybe some people are only trying to inform the public toward a certain angle, you know, and to be aware of that is critical. But it takes a lot to be truly informed, you know. And it's hard to promote in a culture that promotes entertainment the way that it does today. Yeah, and consumption, just consuming, you know. So, yeah, I don't watch too much TV myself.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And the only thing was satire. It wasn't like pure entertainment. It was like something that's at least relatable, somewhat. By the same guy I was talking about earlier, I really like his, you know, approach to it. At least it's something. Where he says you can scare people to what it could be, and at the same time show them like the ideal. Like so you scare them, and that like even if it's like, I guess you could go major scale, but they've done it with like minor issues, that like addictions or like bad habits, and they go, this is what will happen if you don't change your ways. And you make it yourself. You're not told what it is. You just try to think, what will happen if I don't change my ways now? And then you write that down. And then you write down, what if I do? What could it be like? And that somewhat gives you at least a motivation to, you know, break your habit. But that was like a general solution that I like to go about it. Maybe you could get people to care that way if it's not going to be, you know, unfortunately through facts, because every, you know,
Well,
you have your people.
Rather ironic, so that could actually end up being worse somehow, which is kind of dumb in today's stance. Is that if I tell somebody, this is what will happen if you keep on going down the road you're in, right? And it's obviously going to be something more negative, right? This is what it could be or it should be, right? It could be more positive. And then there have been people I know that they hear that, and what they immediately think is that I'm trying to downplay, I'm trying to make them feel like they're absolute trash. Because I just told them that they have no future unless they change, right? And the idea that somebody could get more offended instead of being understanding that, like, they take the wrong way. And I just think that's like absolutely hysterical at times, and yet somehow just as stupid.
Misjudgments are going to happen, but I like the beauty about it is you're not told what the ideal is. This is all coming from you, what you want. You're not told, like, you know, obviously everybody has their bad habits, and you could misinterpret it that way, but, I mean, or people could misinterpret it that way, but what I like about it is it's all up to you, right? So people have told me, you know, it's like, this is it, right? This is the dream. Make money, you know, family, whatever it is, and too often it's like not what you're trying to do. You know, it's better if you boil it down at least to make it relatable to what you want, but unfortunately people don't talk about as a collective what you want. It's about what everybody else, what the big, you know, thing is, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, if that's it, or what's like socially acceptable. So I like it when it's more individual, like this is what you're trying to do and this is what will happen to you if you don't do it. And it's all coming from your own mind and attitude from it. You're not being told what will happen to you. You're not being told what you want to do, you know?
Yes, there are some, there are times where it's clearly obvious that at times, like, society is the path that you should follow. There are times where this sort of groupthink element is, I mean, look at America, we have the groupthink of individualism.
We have groupthink about that.
Yeah, we have
That's our groupthink.
the groupthink
Is ideological individualism.
But
So it's an interesting dynamic.
yeah, and it's of course there's a limit on it. There needs to be some moderation. You know, kind of like with related back to like your alcohol and drugs sort of thing. Like there's too much of a like. Well, yes, people should be allowed to sort of, in my opinion, to like make these choices, do these drugs if you want to, but note that society, in the end, should have your back if you choose to pull out. You know, if you choose to pull out, then they should attempt to encourage you, and you should not be socially outcasted. You should be allowed to pull out from it.
No, let's continue. Because I mean, at what point does it just boil down to like, should we be looking at improving individuals individually, or should we just be gluing them all together and trying to get a nice standard of, hey, this is right, you know, don't do drugs, you know, that sort of stuff, and this is wrong, you know, doing drugs or not. Like, at what point does it become like, should we train people to, not train obviously, but should we kind of raise,
Indoctrinate?
not indoctrinate
That's-
either.
Rehabilitate, is that the word you're
Well, like, it just, should we be
Re-educate.
making people able to know that something's right and something's wrong, or should we just have to tell them, you know, like,
Well, based on our culture now, where it's self-assumed, where you have to assume what is right and wrong for yourself, that may not always be the best case. For example, the shootings that happened, they probably thought, oh, what I'm doing is the right thing. But no, killing innocent civilians is not the right thing. And Mr. Janicek was saying you need the father figure. Hoy was saying you need faith. I was saying that you need different people in your life to steer you back on the path. You need those people to teach you what's right and not to be a moron and kill people.
Well, I mean, irregardless if you know what is right and wrong, there is, you know, for some people there will be a breaking point for them where they just say screw it and do it anyway. So I think we should focus more on helping them kind of stabilize their life and not get to that breaking point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the breaking point could only come from the problems that we've discussed: not having a father, not having faith.
well, but it's also up the chance that what if somebody just doesn't listen, as I believe he was trying to say. Said like,
Doesn't listen.
well, if he just doesn't listen, there's been,
just disregards it.
Just
like,
disregards
even
it.
though they know the measures.
right, because there's always be those dudes, they're gonna exist. Like, you could tell them as many times as you want, like,
Don't do it.
like don't do something like that, right? Like, but
Then
they do it anyways, and then
Well, yeah, there will always be those type of people
So why
that
don't we
will
try
break
to
the laws or
improve
won't listen to
individuals?
the rules. I understand that, but there comes a point in time where you have to be more strict.
no, I
In
get
Canada
that.
and
Why-
Japan, I was listening to the girl talk from the high school. Canada and Japan have had one massive shooting for
But they completely ban firearms, like for the most part, at least. I
Yeah,
believe that
but-
Japan does.
I mean,
We're a free country, dude.
I know we're free. I live here. But
Free and what?
Don't get me started on that girl.
How about we wrap it up?
Okay, I mean, anyone want to have any last things to add?
Don't do drugs.
don't do drugs. Have faith. Have people there to help you.
Yeah, it's basically like you got to have a balance, like riding a bike with training wheels, you know? You put the training wheels on in the beginning, you learn how to ride, take them off, keep on going. But some people, like in today's society, some people, they have the training wheels on their entire life. And other people, they don't get them at all, and so they don't know what to do. And that's, I don't know, I guess that's a good analogy to wrap this show up with. Thanks for listening, guys, and join us hopefully next week for the next episode.